David Stone disappeared into the New Mexico desert, and he did so leaving a strange trail of pyramids and cryptic numbers. Some people think that he was silenced by forces outside of this universe because he had somehow hacked into the codes of reality that no human being is even supposed to know about. Others swear that he was transformed into something more, and what was left was just a discarded shell. In any case, he disappeared Halloween night, 1988, and here we're going to try to figure out what happened. In order to get a glimpse of what might have happened, we really need to go back and see who he was before he got swept up into New Age spiritualism. Born on March 18, 1959, to Harry and Carol Stone, David Lawrence Stone grew up in El Paso, Texas. He was athletic, determined, and bright. Early friends remembered him as gentle, somewhat humble, but definitely capable of intense drive. He lettered in football at the University of Texas, where he played linebacker with a controlled ferocity that contrasted sharply with his soft-spoken nature, proudly wearing the jersey number 18. By the way, 18 would be a number that would follow him cryptically for the rest of his life, right up until his disappearance. But David, of course, was much more than just an athlete. He was reflective, pensive, and in his early days, he was almost philosophical. He studied things, people, systems, causes and effects. Patterns really interested him. All kinds of patterns. Patterns in behavior, patterns in luck, and eventually, patterns in numbers.
I think he could be best described as an overachiever in just about every way. You never met a kinder, gentler young man than him, very close to family. But then on the other hand, you could put him in a football uniform and he was like a proverbial commando.
In 1982, David joined his father's investment firm, and maybe that was part of what set him onto that dark path that would ultimately end with one of the biggest mysteries of the last century, because it was there, as a stock market analyst, that he quickly discovered that he not only had a gift for numbers, no, he could actually see the information behind the numbers. He instinctively felt the logic beneath the chaos, ratios, retracements, Fibonacci sequences, trend lines. His colleagues described him as a genius with numbers. They said that he was focused, intelligent, and responsible, one of the very few people who understood the rules that tethered the world together. Well, by 1988, he was living in San Diego, still working with numbers and still working for his father at one of the firm's many satellite locations. But at night, he was taking courses in advertising, perhaps choosing to shift away from finance towards something more creative. To his friends, it looked like a career pivot. To others, it looked like a quiet search for something beyond the spreadsheets and earning reports. But no one had any idea that actually David was undergoing a fundamental shift in the way that he saw reality.
A few weeks prior to Halloween, his class was asked to design magazine covers for a place they'd like to visit. David chose Sedona, Arizona, a popular destination for vision quests. It's believed that through isolation and meditation, vision quests can lead to otherwise hidden inner truths. It's a common rite of passage for the New Age movement, which is known for self-enlightenment and spiritual growth. David's enthusiasm on the subject puzzled my father, since he had never heard of his friend talk about Sedona before. After class, my dad asked David, "Hey, what's up with all that New Age and Sedona stuff?" David responded, "Oh, it's a very fascinating and important place."
It seemed out of the blue, really. David all of a sudden became fascinated with New Age philosophy, a topic that he had never really mentioned before. Vision quests, Sedona vortexes, spiritual confrontations with the inner beast. All concepts that he began to speak about with an unusual intensity. Everyone was puzzled. David had never talked about such things like Sedona before. He had never described himself as spiritual. Even his closest friends didn't know where this enthusiasm had come from. Then, on October 28, 1988, David hosted a small Halloween party at his apartment. It was quiet, friendly, and uneventful. Well, that is, until it wasn't.
Welcome to Velarcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, my husband tells the stories, And if you want to help build this channel, like, subscribe, and comment.
3 days before Halloween, on Friday, October 28, 1988, several of David's friends had gathered at David's apartment for a Halloween get-together. The evening began peaceful and was buzzing along just fine until one of the guests grabbed one of David's golf clubs and then started doing practice swings with it in the living room. When David saw it, well, he just went crazy.
I heard about it the next morning, roughly around 9 a.m. David came down and he told me what he had done. David said he started hitting him. He said he might have hit him 25 times. He said he didn't really hurt him, but he felt like he had to do that.
The him that John Duffus was referring to was a man named Anders, supposedly one of David's friends. And as far as not really hurting Anders, well, he didn't exactly send him to the hospital, but David did bust him up pretty badly, slammed him up against the wall, and then began pounding on him relentlessly. It was so bad that others had to intervene and pull him off of the poor guy. When it was all done, Anders was left black and blue, bleeding and shaken. Well, this change in behavior seemed to just come out of nowhere, and it wasn't isolated to that one event either. When another friend had returned to retrieve a forgotten jacket, David blocked the doorway, and he said something that confused him. He said, "Don't you know what he represents?" The friend said that the way that he spoke that sentence seemed strange, symbolic, almost ritualistic. When pressed, David's eyes seemed to swim into focus, and he apologized and he said that he just needed some time to reflect. Well, the next morning, he told his roommate that he was leaving for a few days. He said that he needed space. He needed clarity. He said that he might go to Sedona, or the Sonoran Desert, maybe the Grand Canyon. He packed lightly, didn't say another word, and then got into his Buick and drove east. It was all so mysterious. And that was the last time that anyone saw David acting in any way that resembled his old self. David's movements over the next 48 hours formed a tight, traceable arc, one that grew stranger and more confusing with every mile. On Saturday, October 29th, he checked into a hotel in Eloy, Arizona, but he only stayed there for a few hours. Later that night, at 10:22 p.m., he withdrew $200 from an ATM in Tucson. That's over 50 miles away to the southeast. Then about 6 hours after that, at 4:03 a.m., Sunday morning, October 30th, he purchased gas near Red Forks, New Mexico. That's 140 miles further east. From there, witnesses said that they saw him turn onto New Mexico Highway 80, heading south toward a remote desert area called Granite Gap. And then, for the next 24 hours, he sort of just dropped off of the radar. Nobody really knows what he did during that time. And it was early Halloween morning, just as the sun was peeking over the horizon, when a rancher named Larry Rivers spotted a man walking along a dirt road. It was a cold morning, and as the rancher got closer, he could see that the man was only wearing shorts and a thin t-shirt.
I stopped my pickup truck and asked him, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I'm looking for the beast."
Looking for the beast? Interestingly, had this been several hundred miles north, Larry Rivers just might have given David directions to the beast. If you know why, don't tell whoever's watching with you. Instead, let's see if we can add a little bit more value to this video and play a little trivia game. Get your answer in your mind, or better yet, write it down, and as an added bonus, at the end of the video, Amy will share the answer. And if you got it right, leave me a comment and let me know. Well, two more witnesses saw David later that same morning. He was muttering to himself and moving slowly across the rough terrain. He was looking as if he was following something that only he could see.
We had left our home in Cotton City and were driving up to the ranch. As we went by, we saw this young man and thought perhaps he'd had car trouble, so we stopped. He told us he wasn't having car trouble, and so we just went on.
I heard this voice, and I seen this man walking across the way there across the railroad track. I thought it was unusual that he'd be going across the desert at that time of year in shorts and no coat or anything, you know. I heard him say, "I am the power," over and over again.
Those were the last people that David ever spoke to, but they weren't the last people that he left messages for. On November 2nd, 1988, David's Buick was discovered parked at an odd angle off of Highway 80. Reportedly, it wasn't too far from mile marker 18, and there were no signs of a struggle. Inside were personal belongings, things that one would expect to find in someone's car. But there was also a pocket Bible with two mysterious items shoved into the pages. One was a folded-up note that we'll get into in just a bit. The other was a business card belonging to a man named Tony Ballesteros, supposedly a stranger that David had never met. When contacted, Ballesteros said that he had left that card in a tree near a deserted campsite for his friends to find. How it ended up in David's Bible back in his car, well, that's just one of the many mysteries that still remain unexplained with this case. Shortly after David was identified as the owner of the car, his father got involved and a search party was formed. 4 planes, bloodhounds, more than 40 volunteers, including professional trackers. And check this out. They found no water sources, no discarded food wrappers, no sleeping areas. There were no signs of survival efforts at all.
It's real rare for a person to be out as long as he probably was, without ever losing a gum wrapper, or without ever finding any sign of where they slept, where they ate. Any sign of that kind of stuff we never found.
If this case would have ended there, then this story most certainly would not have made it onto this channel. No, where the normal ends, the absolute high strangeness begins. About a half a mile from the road, searchers found the first sign. It was a carefully constructed pyramid. It was made out of sand and stones, and it was arranged deliberately with a triangle base. It wasn't a happenstance of nature, and it wasn't someone just fooling around. No, it was purposely placed, and it screamed silent message or hidden meaning.
That's when they found a large pyramid up in that wash that had been made out of sand, molded up, and rocks on the corner. That was the first thing we found.
In the New Age movement, a pyramid symbolizes energy focus, purification, initiation. To an analyst, the pyramid's shape resembles a base formation, the beginning of a pattern. Seemingly, David, who is now just a little bit of both, New Ager and analyst, had left his first marker. Shortly after the search party discovered this pyramid, several of the volunteers began to get that eerie feeling like they were being watched. Oddly, many of them thought that David was there somewhere, hiding, just out of sight.
After I got further down the canyon, it seemed like the tracks were real fresh. I had a real strange feeling. A hair stood up on my arms, and I had an intense feeling that he was sitting somewhere watching me.
When Amy was sharing this story with me, and we got to this part, I thought of that old saying. How does it go? And I know I'm going to screw this up. Every journey begins with a sign, but not every sign was meant to be understood, right? Well, this pyramid was only the beginning, because the deeper the search teams pushed into the canyon, the more deliberate and downright odd the clues became, forming a trail that connected David's two worlds, analytics and the New Age movement, and it did so in ways that no one could have expected. On the second day into the search, deeper into the canyon, trackers found a second pyramid. But this side was definitely stranger than the first, because this time, David carefully positioned his Rolex watch and 2 quarters in what looked like to be a ceremonious type of fashion. The Rolex was more than just valuable to David, it was sentimental, something that most people who knew him say that he wouldn't have just carelessly tossed aside. The quarters equally deliberate, of course, forming a perfect 50 cents. That's a number that sits right there at the midpoint of almost every financial chart, the psychological 50% retracement level that's used by analysts to identify major turning points in markets. Was David marking the halfway point on a spiritual journey? Or maybe he was signaling the midpoint of a personal pattern cycle. In his symbolic language, the Rolex most likely represented time, and the coins represented value divided, halved, paused. This location, this moment, it was definitely orchestrated. Was this message left for the world, or had David just performed a personal ritual on his own spiritual path? Oh, and it gets even stranger. 3 miles beyond the second pyramid, the desert offered its most mystifying clue yet. It was a set of numbers pressed into the sand. Now you tell me if you recognize this sequence, and don't go looking it up on the internet. 1, 1, 2, 5, 8, 13, 18. Most likely you don't recognize that sequence. Most people don't. At first glance, it just looks like a random list of numbers. But to someone who had a deep understanding of numbers, this is unmistakable. If you guessed that it was the Fibonacci sequence, well, you would only be half right. That's because the last number, 18, should have been 21. David Stone knew Fibonacci. He had used it professionally, and he most certainly would not have written it wrong accidentally. Yet, he placed 18 where 21 should be.
He knew better than that. So it's one of the mysteries. Why would he write 18 instead of 21? But that goes along with a lot of other unanswered questions.
As I alluded to in the beginning of this video, the number 18 seemed to follow David throughout his life. His birthday, March 18th. His college football jersey was 18. The mile marker near his abandoned Buick, supposedly that was 18. And here, deliberately placed incorrectly in the Fibonacci sequence, 18. Some people say that 18 is a numerical echo of 666. 6 times 3, 18. I don't know if that's true. But if it is, well, then it eerily seems to add just a little bit of clarity to that peculiar statement that he had made to rancher Larry Rivers when he said that he was out looking for the beast. Maybe that was more of a reference to him trying to conquer the beast within. But then again, the beast related to 666 comes from the ancient passage in Revelations, and there the beast is said to be a man. Perhaps David felt like the beast is symbolic of mankind, the everyman. Well, there, while everyone was looking at these numbers, the moment got kind of weird. Once the sequence was discovered for what it was, the Fibonacci sequence deliberately written incorrectly, well, all of the searchers stared at it, puzzled. It screamed coded message. What did it mean? It was written by someone highly intelligent who had once been referred to as a genius with numbers. This was the third marker on David's path, and like the first two, it belonged to both of his worlds, the solid world of the tangible, numbers and things like that, and the esoteric world of the higher mind, deeper meaning. Well, up until this point, with no sign of David except for these bizarre messages, rescue teams had just assumed that he had pressed deeper into the mountains. That is, until they brought the bloodhounds in. They did something completely unexpected. They turned around, and they followed David's scent all the way back out to Highway 80. Then they kept going. They finally went 13 miles until they reached Interstate 10. And then the scent just stopped. It didn't fade away. It didn't drift off. It stopped, as if David had somehow stepped through a porthole into another world.
At the time, we took it to be a hopeful sign that he'd hitchhiked out, or that somebody had given him a ride, and that was the only thing we could understand that would mean why the scent disappeared like it did.
This was strong evidence that David had left the desert alive, and for the next few years, his silence kept everyone wondering, where was he? One piece of evidence that everybody kept going back to was that note that was found in the Buick in that pocket Bible. Remember that? I said we would get to it in a minute. Well, it was really cryptic. It read, "They think the word is in the safe. 6 knives in Rob's room. Use buys your tea, and use take your chances. Halloween. Chaotic, right? Nonsensical, for sure."
We don't know what the word tea means. We think it's the old saying, you buy your ticket and you take your chances. But it just says, use buys your tea and use takes your chances. Halloween. And that was the day he disappeared, which was October 31st. Halloween.
Interestingly, and this is just my mind musing, when read phonetically, the final line could sound differently. It could be read something like this: "You buy security and you still take your chances on Halloween." Security, like his old life maybe, and chances, the risk that he was taking, and Halloween, the day that ritual transformation is of course said to be most potent. The note, depending on how one reads it, I guess, could be interpreted as a man losing touch, just a scribblings of crazy thoughts, or it could be something more, the final clue of something that we just can't decipher. In any case, we'll never know, because just a few years later, the world got definitive proof that David Stone most certainly did not make it out of that desert. Three and a half years after David Stone vanished on February 23, 1992, hunters found his skeletal remains in a granite outcropping about a mile west of Highway 80, not at all that far from where his clues had been discovered. Medical examiners could not find a cause of death. There seemed to have been no trauma, no violence, but then again, they didn't have a lot to work with. There wasn't anything left but bones. Nature had taken the rest. No clothing except for shoe fragments, one tennis shoe near the bones, and then the other one miles away. His keys, license, credit cards, glasses, all gone. But the detail that still baffles investigators today is that search teams had passed within just yards of this very location in 1988, and the bloodhounds hadn't reacted at all. There was no hint, no scent, no trace. As a matter of fact, they followed his scent all the way back to the highway. So if he left, then why return? This is the moment that the case stops being a disappearance and it becomes something else entirely. Did David attempt some type of a ritual? Maybe fail? Leave the desert and then, return sometime later? Or did he never leave? And for whatever reason, his scent was thrown off like a ventriloquist throws a voice. No conventional explanation answers both halves to this question. But something else just might. Perhaps David Stone unlocked a puzzle, one that somehow combined two apparently opposing worlds, spiritualism and the solid, seemingly unchanging world of numbers. Could David have fused these two conflicting worlds together? Maybe David walked into that desert knowing something that the rest of us don't. Maybe he found a way to transform or transcend into something beyond human. In the end, of course, we don't know if that's the case or if the desert just claimed the life of a man who was chasing meaning way too intensely. What we do know is this: he left a message, maybe for the world, a message that sadly has been all but forgotten, a message in pyramids, in coins, in time abandoned, in numbers broken and then rewritten, a message of intention, and maybe a message of transformation. And if that's so, well, what could we do if we understood that message? Unfortunately, we'll never know, because now that message only echoes in old case files, and perhaps the early morning hours of the dry sands of the New Mexico desert.
You know, I love trivia, and had David's disappearance happened just a few hundred miles to the north, Larry Rivers might have actually given David directions to the Beast. That's because the Beast was actually the nickname for U.S. Highway 666. It was also called the Devil's Highway, and back when David disappeared, it was still called Route 666. It was numbered that way because it was the sixth branch of Route 66. And locals hated that omen, so in 2003, it was officially renamed US 491. You know, speaking of 666, our last mystery featured a man who actually was referred to as 666. If you'd like to see it, click there.